July 5, 1942. Bay of Biscay, off the coast of France. Kapitänleutnant Jürgen von Rosenstiel stood on the conning tower of U-502, scanning the darkness with binoculars rendered useless by the moonless night. His Iron Cross, earned during earlier Atlantic patrols, hung beneath layers of wool and oiled leather fighting against the Atlantic spray. What happened in the next 90 seconds would mark a turning point in submarine warfare, the first kill using a revolutionary weapon combination that would eventually destroy Germany's U-boat fleet. The searchlight erupted without warning, 22 million candelas of carbon arc brilliance transforming midnight into blazing noon. U-502 sat exposed and vulnerable, caught surfaced with hatches open and crew members frozen on deck. In that horrifying instant of illumination, von Rosenstiel glimpsed not just his submarine pinned beneath impossible light, but the beginning of a technological revolution that would hunt U-boats to extinction. His lookout's screams came too late. The Wellington bomber, piloted by American volunteer Wiley B. Howell, serving with 172 Squadron RAF, had approached in complete silence, guided by ASV Mark II radar that gave warning to the Metox detector German engineers had promised would protect them. But this attack was different. The blinding searchlight, mounted in a retractable housing beneath the aircraft's fuselage, illuminated U-502 with such intensity that every rivet, every crew member, every detail stood out as clearly as daylight. 4 depth charges fell in a perfect straddle before von Rosenstiel could order the crash dive. The explosions lifted U-502's stern clear of the water, rupturing the pressure hull and flooding multiple compartments. The submarine went down in minutes, taking all 52 crew members with her, including von Rosenstiel. They became the first confirmed victims of the Leigh Light, a weapon that would terrorize U-boat crews for the next 3 years. What von Rosenstiel couldn't know in his final moments was that this was merely the beginning. The Leigh Light, devastating as it was, would soon be paired with technology far more advanced than the radar that had guided Howell's attack. Within months, British scientists would deploy centimetric radar operating on wavelengths German experts had declared impossible to achieve in aircraft. Admiral Karl Dönitz himself had laughed at intelligence reports, suggesting the British could miniaturize high-frequency radar for airborne use. German naval intelligence insisted such technology lay years in the future, if it was achievable at all. The physics were settled. The engineering was impossible. Yet Allied scientists had already solved problems German engineers insisted were unsolvable, and were racing to deploy technology that would render submarines visible in any weather, any darkness, from distances that gave crews no chance to dive, no warning to escape, and no hope of survival. U-502's destruction on that July night in 1942 was a preview of the slaughter to come. By May 1943, aircraft equipped with even more advanced radar would hunt U-boats with such efficiency that Germany would lose 41 submarines in a single month, forcing Dönitz to withdraw his entire fleet from the Atlantic in defeat. The certainty of Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic was being written not in convoy battles or torpedo attacks, but in scientific laboratories where British researchers had achieved what German experts deemed fantasy. The technological revolution that would hunt U-boats to extinction had begun, built on innovations that would reshape modern warfare forever. German confidence in submarine invincibility stemmed from legitimate technical achievements. In early 1940, the Kriegsmarine possessed the world's most advanced naval radar systems. The Sea-Tact fire control radar allowed German warships to target enemies beyond visual range with unprecedented precision. When France fell in June 1940, German intelligence captured British radar equipment that seemed primitive compared to German systems. The technical assessment prepared by German naval intelligence reinforced existing confidence. British air search radar operates on wavelengths approaching 1.5 meters, far too imprecise for effective submarine detection, concluded a classified report circulated through naval headquarters in August 1940. Reducing wavelength to centimetric range would require power generation impossible in aircraft. The British lack both theoretical knowledge and industrial capacity for such miniaturization. Admiral Dönitz can be assured that U-boats remain invisible to enemy aircraft beyond visual range. This assessment wasn't propaganda, but represented genuine scientific understanding. Generating high-frequency radio waves required vacuum tubes handling enormous power at precise frequencies. Physics suggested that creating wavelengths short enough for accurate target resolution demanded generators too massive for aircraft. Every calculation supported the conclusion that effective airborne submarine detection radar remained years from practical deployment. Admiral Dönitz toured Berlin's Technical University in September 1940, meeting physics professors who confirmed centimetric radar's impossibility for aircraft use. These weren't party ideologues, but internationally respected scientists. Professor Hans Müller, who had studied under Max Planck, demonstrated mathematical constraints limiting radar miniaturization using equations covering 3 blackboards. To generate sufficient energy at 10-centimeter wavelength requires equipment weighing several tons, Müller explained to the assembled naval officers. Even if the British somehow achieved this miniaturization, their aircraft would lack carrying capacity for weapons or fuel. The system is theoretically possible in laboratory conditions, but practically absurd for operational military use. Dönitz left that meeting satisfied that U-boats could operate surfaced at night without fear of aerial detection beyond visual range. This confidence shaped German tactical doctrine through 1940 and 1941. U-boats spent days submerged hiding from visual detection, then surfaced after dark to recharge batteries, travel at higher speeds, and position for attacks. Surface running allowed 18-knot speeds compared to 7 knots submerged, crucial advantages for overtaking convoys or escaping pursuit. More critically, surfaced submarines recharged the massive battery banks powering underwater propulsion. A submerged Type 7 U-boat might operate 24 hours before batteries depleted dangerously. Surface running was mandatory for continued operations, and German commanders assumed darkness provided adequate protection against aircraft that lacked effective detection equipment. The first troubling reports came in late 1941, when commanders described nighttime attacks by British aircraft operating in complete darkness. These reports were initially dismissed as confused encounters where crews mistook twilight for full night or confused searchlights from surface vessels with aircraft attacks. Korvettenkapitän Erich Topp, commanding U-552, filed detailed action reports in December 1941, describing attacks occurring on moonless nights with cloud cover eliminating even starlight. The aircraft approached from directly astern, as if guided by exact knowledge of our position and heading, Topp wrote in his war diary. We received no warning from our lookouts or detection equipment. The attack came from altitude and angle, suggesting the pilot saw us clearly despite total darkness that should have made visual detection impossible. Our lookouts never detected the aircraft until bombs were already falling. Only our immediate crash dive saved the boat. Naval staff in Berlin reviewed Topp's report with concern, but attributed attacks to undetected surface vessels using searchlights. The possibility that aircraft could locate submarines in total darkness remained officially impossible according to German technical assessments. Then came evidence Berlin couldn't dismiss. In June 1941, a Wellington bomber equipped with ASV Mark II radar made an emergency landing near Cherbourg after being damaged by German fighters. The crew had attempted destroying radar equipment before surrendering, but enough remained for German technicians to reconstruct its operation. What they found simultaneously confirmed earlier assessments and introduced disturbing questions that German experts struggled to answer. The British radar operated exactly as German calculations predicted, using 1.5-meter wavelength matching captured 1940 equipment. German engineers congratulated themselves on accurate intelligence and technical analysis. However, equipment performance exceeded theoretical predictions in troubling ways. British engineers had somehow achieved greater range and resolution than German calculations suggested possible with such wavelengths. The equipment was more sophisticated and effective than German experts had anticipated. Kapitän zur See Wolfgang Martini, Chief of Luftwaffe Signals Intelligence, supervised the analysis personally. His August 1941 report to Hermann Göring maintained confidence while acknowledging unexpected enemy competence. The British have achieved modest improvements through clever engineering, but fundamental physics prevents the miniaturization necessary for truly effective airborne submarine detection at shorter wavelengths, Martini concluded. We can counter this current system with simple radio detection equipment that will warn our boats when aircraft radar operates nearby, giving adequate time to dive before aircraft come within attack range. Martini proved half right. The solution he proposed, a radar detector alerting crews to incoming aircraft, proved highly effective against ASV Mark II radar. The device, manufactured in Paris by the Metox company and designated R600, began deploying to U-boats in summer 1942, covering wavelengths from 60 to 265 centimeters, well encompassing the 1.5-meter signals from British radar. The R600 could detect radar transmissions at ranges up to 6 miles, giving commanders ample warning to dive before aircraft came within attack range for depth charge drops. Metox introduction seemed to validate German confidence in their technical assessments. Through autumn 1942, commanders reported increasing success evading nighttime air attacks. Allied shipping losses reached catastrophic levels as submarines regained nighttime invulnerability despite the Leigh Light's introduction. Dönitz authorized a letter of commendation to Martini, praising Luftwaffe technical services for providing decisive technological advantage in the ongoing submarine campaign. By October 1942, RAF Coastal Command statistics showed Metox's impact with brutal clarity. Before June 1942, aircraft equipped with ASV Mark II found and attacked U-boats every 95 flying hours on average. After Metox became common among U-boat fleet, that figure increased to 135 hours, effectively neutralizing the radar advantage that had given British aircraft such success earlier in the year. British pilots reported with increasing frustration that submarines were diving before aircraft came within attack range, clearly warned of approaching radar emissions by German detection equipment. Some German naval officers began speaking confidently of U-boat dominance returning permanently once tactics adapted to the new technological environment. Fregattenkapitän Günther Hessler, son-in-law to Admiral Dönitz and chief analyst at U-boat headquarters, prepared a confidential assessment in December 1942, projecting continued submarine supremacy into 1943 and beyond. The enemy has revealed his technological capabilities through captured equipment and observed tactics, Hessler wrote with satisfaction. Our countermeasures are proving effective across all operational theatres. The British have no alternative detection method available that could threaten our operations. We face no technological threat capable of compromising submarine operations for the foreseeable future, barring unforeseen revolutionary developments in radar technology that our technical experts assure us remain impossible with current scientific understanding. Every line of Hessler's confident assessment would prove catastrophically wrong within 4 months. What German intelligence had completely failed to detect was a revolution occurring in British laboratories, driven by a device so compact it could fit in one hand yet so powerful it would transform modern warfare fundamentally and permanently alter the balance of power in the Battle of the Atlantic. In February 1940, while German forces prepared for the invasion of France, 2 British physicists at Birmingham University solved a problem that would ultimately determine the war's outcome in the Atlantic. John Randall and Harry Boot, working in near secrecy under the direction of Professor Marcus Oliphant, created the cavity magnetron, a revolutionary vacuum tube capable of generating enormous microwave power at 10-centimeter wavelengths. Their device weighed less than 5 kilograms, but produced 400 watts of pulsed power at frequencies German scientists had dismissed as impossible to achieve in practical equipment suitable for military applications. On February 21, 1940, Randall and Boot conducted their first successful test of the cavity magnetron in their Birmingham laboratory. The results astonished even the inventors themselves. Within a week of refinements, they had pushed output power over 1,000 watts, and subsequent improvements by engineers at General Electric Company would boost performance to over 10 kilowatts, making practical airborne radar systems suddenly achievable. The cavity magnetron worked on principles German physicists understood theoretically, but had failed to implement practically. Instead of using traditional vacuum tubes with heated filaments and complex electrode structures, Randall and Boot's revolutionary design used a cylindrical copper block with precisely machined cavities that resonated at microwave frequencies. When powered by relatively simple electrical systems, these resonating cavities produced intense electromagnetic radiation at wavelengths short enough to detect small objects with remarkable precision and clarity. The physical size of the device was determined by wavelength rather than power requirements, making it small enough for aircraft installation while generating sufficient power for effective target detection at operationally useful ranges. The British government recognised the cavity magnetron's significance immediately. In September 1940, as the Battle of Britain raged overhead and invasion threatened, a scientific mission led by Sir Henry Tizard arrived in Washington carrying Britain's most precious secrets wrapped in a simple black box. Among documents describing jet engines, proximity fuses, and code-breaking machines was a single-cavity magnetron that American scientists would later describe as worth more than all other secrets combined. One American physicist examining the device called it the most valuable cargo ever brought to our shores, more important to the war's outcome than any other single piece of technology shared between the Allied nations. The magnetron allowed both Britain and America to leapfrog German radar development by an entire generation, creating detection systems operating on wavelengths 10 times shorter than what German equipment could generate, with resolution and accuracy that transformed radar from crude detection tool to precision targeting system. Shorter wavelengths meant dramatically improved resolution and target discrimination capabilities. Radar operating at 1.5-meter wavelength might detect submarines at several miles, but couldn't distinguish them reliably from waves, surface debris, schools of fish, or rocky coastlines. Background clutter from the sea surface made target identification extremely difficult, and attack solutions highly uncertain, giving submarines opportunities to escape detection by diving when aircraft approached. However, 10-centimeter radar could resolve individual features on submarine conning towers at ranges exceeding 10 miles, tracking them continuously as aircraft closed for attack. The technology transformed night and fog from submarine protection into irrelevant conditions that Allied aircraft could simply ignore, operating with near-daylight effectiveness regardless of visibility or weather. But developing the cavity magnetron into operational equipment required solving dozens of complex engineering challenges that consumed 2 years of desperate development work. The magnetron generated enormous heat during operation, requiring sophisticated cooling systems that added weight and complexity. Its electrical power demands exceeded what most existing aircraft could supply without major electrical system modifications. The microwave radiation it produced required entirely new antenna designs, display systems, and signal processing equipment that had to be invented from scratch. British engineers worked desperately through 1941 and 1942, knowing German U-boats were strangling Britain's supply lines while the technological solution sat on laboratory benches awaiting practical implementation that seemed frustratingly distant. The breakthrough enabling rapid deployment came from an unexpected source within the British military bureaucracy. RAF Bomber Command was simultaneously developing H-2S, a ground-mapping radar system using the cavity magnetron to help bombers navigate and identify targets through clouds and darkness that had previously made precision bombing impossible. By late 1942, H-2S had progressed to operational flight testing, and its antenna system was detecting surface features with unprecedented clarity that exceeded even optimistic predictions. Robert Hanbury Brown, a young physicist working on radar development at the Telecommunications Research Establishment, realized that H-2S required only minor modifications to become a highly effective anti-submarine weapon. The same radar technology that could map German cities from 20,000 feet altitude could easily detect surfaced U-boats from 10 miles away with even greater precision. Brown's technically sound suggestion faced immediate political obstacles that threatened to delay deployment by months. Bomber Command, already receiving far more resources and priority than Coastal Command in the allocation battles fought in Whitehall, refused to delay H-2S development to create a submarine detection variant. Air Marshal Arthur Harris, commanding Bomber Command with single-minded focus on the strategic bombing campaign, considered anti-submarine warfare a defensive waste of resources that diverted precious aircraft from bombing Germany into industrial collapse. He blocked efforts to modify H-2S for maritime patrol duties until direct intervention from Churchill's scientific advisors forced bureaucratic cooperation that Harris resented. The bureaucratic battle delayed operational deployment by precious months, during which U-boats sank hundreds of thousands of tons of Allied shipping that might have been saved. When the modified radar finally reached operational status in early 1943, it received the designation ASV Mark III. The system used an H-2S cavity magnetron operating at 10-centimeter wavelength, mounted in a streamlined dome beneath aircraft noses to reduce aerodynamic drag. Unlike the earlier ASV Mark II system that required operators to interpret fuzzy, ambiguous blips on primitive cathode ray screens, Mark III provided clear plan position indicator displays showing submarines' exact locations, bearings and ranges with map-like clarity. Experienced radar operators could identify surfaced U-boats at ranges exceeding 12 miles in good conditions, tracking them continuously with precision as aircraft approached for attack runs, maintaining contact through the critical final miles when earlier radar systems lost resolution. The Germans remained completely unaware of this revolutionary development, despite multiple intelligence opportunities. Their Metox receivers, designed to detect Allied radar, could only pick up the 1.5-meter wavelength emissions from ASV Mark II. The 10-centimeter transmissions from ASV Mark III were completely invisible to German detection equipment, arriving without any warning like silent radio darkness. The Metox operators would hear nothing, see nothing on their detection equipment, give no warning to the commander or crew, while enemy aircraft tracked their submarine with perfect precision from miles away. When the new radar was combined with improved tactics and the Leigh Light searchlight system that had already proven its deadly effectiveness, the result created hunting systems of devastating efficiency that gave U-boats almost no chance of survival once detected. The first dozen Wellington bombers equipped with ASV Mark III reached operational squadrons in March 1943, just as the Battle of the Atlantic approached its climactic crisis point. The initial deployment was small, carefully managed to test the equipment under combat conditions and train crews in its use, but planners already anticipated rapid expansion once initial operations proved successful. The transformation of U-boat warfare began gradually, disguised within the larger chaos of convoy battles and submarine attacks that continued across the Atlantic. In early March 1943, U-boat commanders started reporting strange new attack patterns that seemed to defy all previous tactical understanding and experience. Aircraft were appearing from nowhere in total darkness, approaching with precision that suggested perfect vision, despite weather conditions that should have made visual detection completely impossible even for experienced lookouts with excellent night vision. Oberleutnant zur See Klaus Bargston, commanding U-521, filed a war diary entry on March 18, 1943, after surviving an attack that seemed designed to shatter every assumption about submarine warfare. We were running surfaced in heavy overcast with sea state 4, visibility less than 500 meters in darkness and rain, Bargston wrote in his report that would be recovered from German naval archives after the war. Our Metox detector showed absolutely no radar emissions. All detection equipment indicated we were operating in electronic silence. Suddenly, without any warning, a Wellington appeared directly ahead at low altitude, already illuminated by a searchlight which I initially believed came from our own direction, until I realized we were the target. The pilot obviously could see us perfectly because his approach angle was textbook perfect for a depth charge attack. 4 depth charges fell within meters of our boat before we could even begin emergency dive procedures. Only our immediate crash dive into a steep angle saved us from destruction, though the forward torpedo room flooded through sprung seams and we barely made it back to port with 6 men injured. U-boat headquarters in Berlin reviewed Bargston's report along with similar incidents that were accumulating with alarming frequency, suggesting a systematic change in enemy capabilities rather than isolated lucky encounters. Commanders who had trusted their Metox detection systems absolutely for months were suddenly being attacked without any warning whatsoever. Some reported seeing aircraft approach with searchlights already blazing, but insisted their radar detectors had shown nothing, no emissions, no warning, complete electronic silence. Others described attacks coming from stern quarters where the older ASV Mark II radar couldn't effectively scan, yet the aircraft clearly knew exact submarine positions and headings. A disturbing pattern was emerging that suggested the British had developed entirely new detection systems, but German technical intelligence could identify no candidate technology that matched observed capabilities. Dönitz convened an emergency conference of technical experts on March 22, 1943, demanding answers about what technology the enemy was employing. The meeting transcript, captured by British forces in May 1945, reveals the German Navy's complete technological blindness at this absolutely critical moment in the Atlantic campaign. Fregattenkapitän Günther Hessler, Dönitz's chief of operations and most trusted analyst, opened the meeting with statistics showing dramatic increases in nighttime air attacks, despite no significant change in overall Allied air patrol intensity or patterns. Our boats are being detected and attacked by methods we cannot explain through any known technology, Hessler admitted with evident frustration. Metox equipment remains effective against the British 1.5-metre wavelength radar that we know they possess. We have detected no new radar frequencies in any theatre of operations, yet attacks continue with increasing accuracy and frequency, suggesting the enemy possesses detection capabilities that exceed our current technical understanding or intelligence assessments. Kapitän Wolfgang Martini, representing Luftwaffe technical intelligence at the conference, insisted that no new radar technology could possibly exist that German scientists hadn't anticipated. We have analysed all captured equipment thoroughly through multiple technical examinations, Martini stated with the confidence that would prove so misplaced. The British and Americans lack the capability to miniaturize high-frequency radar for practical aircraft use. Our own research, conducted by Germany's finest physicists and engineers, proves this categorically impossible with current technology and scientific understanding. The enemy must be using alternative detection methods we haven't yet identified. Perhaps they have developed systems for tracking the weak electromagnetic emissions from our Metox detectors, or they may be employing infrared sensors capable of detecting the heat signature from our diesel exhaust systems. Martini's suggestion that British aircraft were somehow homing on Metox detector emissions would cause catastrophic confusion and misguided tactical decisions in the coming critical months. The theory seemed superficially plausible because Metox equipment did emit faint radio signals as part of its internal detection circuitry, a known characteristic of such receivers. German technical staff, unable to imagine that British technology had simply surpassed their own capabilities, convinced themselves that British aircraft must be equipped with highly sensitive receivers capable of detecting these weak emissions from distances of many miles, though no evidence supported this theory and no such Allied equipment actually existed. The false belief would lead to disastrous tactical decisions. In April 1943, based on this completely incorrect assumption about Metox emissions betraying submarine positions, Admiral Dönitz issued orders that would strip away the one defensive system that might have provided some protection against aircraft still using older radar. The directive, distributed on April 17, 1943, to all operational submarines with classification markings indicating its critical importance, stated, "Based on reliable intelligence analysis, enemy aircraft are successfully locating our boats by homing on electromagnetic emissions from Metox radar detection equipment. Commanders will immediately minimize Metox use to brief intervals only when contact with enemy forces is suspected or confirmed. Continuous operation of Metox detection equipment is strictly forbidden. Boats will operate with detection equipment secured except during specific threat periods." The order's impact was immediate and absolutely devastating to U-boat survivability. Submarines that had relied on Metox for early warning of approaching aircraft now operated completely blind to radar threats, unable to detect either the old ASV Mark II or the new revolutionary Mark III radar that was rapidly equipping more Allied aircraft. Even submarines that hadn't yet encountered the new centimetric radar lost their only protection against aircraft still using older meter wavelength systems that Metox could detect effectively. the false theory about Metox emissions, developed by German technical experts who simply couldn't imagine British technological superiority in any domain, stripped away defensive capabilities just as Allied air power reached its maximum effectiveness with new equipment and refined tactics. Meanwhile, RAF Coastal Command was rapidly expanding its ASV Mark III operational capability with aggressive equipment installation and crew training programs. The first dozen aircraft operational in March 1943 grew to 40 by early April as production accelerated and installation crews worked around the clock. By early May, over 100 aircraft carried the revolutionary new radar, and production plans called for hundreds more by summer's end. Each Wellington, Liberator or Sunderland equipped with the new radar became a submarine killer with capabilities that would have seemed like pure science fiction just months earlier, able to detect and track submarines in any weather, any visibility, any time of day or night. Flying Officer Wilfred Thompson, piloting a Wellington bomber of 172 Squadron on Bay of Biscay patrols, described his first operational mission with ASV Mark III in a detailed interview conducted in 1989 shortly before his death. The difference between the old and new radar was absolutely night and day, literally so, Thompson recalled with evident satisfaction even decades later. With the old Mark II radar, you would get a fuzzy, ambiguous blob on your cathode ray screen that might be a submarine or might be a whale, or might just be a large wave or piece of floating debris. You would home in on it as best you could, lose contact at about a mile when the target entered minimum range, then hope desperately that your Leigh Light would catch the actual target before the submarine commander realized what was happening and ordered a crash dive. With Mark III, you had a beautiful clear return on the plan position indicator showing exact range and bearing with precision. You could track the submarine continuously right down to searchlight range, watching its movements, anticipating any maneuvers, timing your attack perfectly. The submarines never knew we were coming until the moment we lit them up with 22 million candelas of searchlight. By then it was far too late for them to escape. The combination of ASV Mark III radar and Leigh Light searchlight created hunting systems of terrible, almost unfair efficiency that gave U-boats minimal chance of survival. Aircraft would locate submarines using radar from ranges of 10 to 12 miles, far beyond any possibility of visual or acoustic detection by submarine lookouts. They would approach at low altitude while maintaining continuous electronic tracking, watching the submarine's movements in real time on the display. Then, at the last moment, just seconds before weapon release, they would illuminate the target with 22 million candelas of carbon arc light that turned night into blazing noon, catching submarines fully surfaced with hatches open and crew members exposed on deck with nowhere to hide. U-boat crews had no warning, no time to dive, no chance for any defensive action before depth charges were already in the air and falling toward them. The first indication of mortal danger was often the searchlight itself, a blinding wall of light that appeared from nowhere, revealing every detail of the submarine and crew with perfect clarity. Kapitänleutnant Peter Peterson, who survived 2 separate Leigh Light attacks while commanding U-518 through sheer luck and skilled seamanship, described the psychological impact of these attacks in detailed interrogation reports filed after his capture in April 1945. "You feel completely and utterly helpless against this weapon system," Peterson admitted to Allied intelligence officers who were documenting U-boat crew experiences and reactions. "You are running on the surface at night, believing yourself effectively invisible to enemy aircraft as you have been trained. Your Metox detector shows nothing, no radar emissions, complete electronic silence that should mean safety. Your lookouts see only darkness in all directions despite their constant vigilance. Then suddenly, without any warning whatsoever, the entire world turns brilliant white, as if someone has switched on the sun at midnight. Every detail of your boat becomes visible, every rivet, every equipment fitting, every crew member frozen in the light. You see your men's faces caught in that terrible illumination, and you know that depth charges are already falling, but your boat needs a full 60 seconds to submerge even in emergency crash dive. You can only pray desperately that the bombs miss their target and pray even harder that your pressure hull survives the shock waves if they detonate close aboard. The psychological effect of these attacks was amplified enormously by their seemingly supernatural accuracy and the complete inability to anticipate or defend against them. U-boat commanders had been extensively trained to trust in darkness and electronic warfare measures. They had learned through hard experience that Metox provided reliable warning of radar surveillance, giving adequate time to dive before aircraft could close to attack range. When aircraft suddenly appeared without any electronic warning, illuminated targets with impossible precision, and delivered attacks with deadly accuracy, it fundamentally shattered all their assumptions about submarine warfare and their ability to survive in this new technological environment. Some commanders began believing that the British had developed entirely exotic new detection systems, perhaps using infrared sensors to detect diesel heat or acoustic devices to hear engines from great distances. The truth that radar technology had simply leapfrogged German capabilities by an entire generation seemed less plausible to many than these exotic alternative explanations. April 1943 brought steadily increasing U-boat losses as more aircraft equipped with ASV Mark III entered operational service, but these losses were modest compared to the catastrophe that was rapidly approaching. The expanded Bay of Biscay offensive, formally begun on April 13th with Operation Derange, deployed 75 long-range aircraft equipped with ASV Mark III to patrol the waters between occupied France and the mid-Atlantic operational areas. U-boats departing from or returning to French ports at Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, La Rochelle and Bordeaux had to cross these killing grounds, running surfaced for much of the journey to conserve precious battery power for operations in the actual patrol areas. Previously, this transit passage had been relatively safe when conducted at night, as visual detection was impossible in darkness, and radar detection could be anticipated through Metox warnings that gave time to dive. Now the Bay of Biscay was rapidly becoming a gauntlet that submarines ran at mortal peril, with aircraft able to detect and attack them regardless of visibility, weather, or time of day. May 1943 would demonstrate with brutal statistical clarity exactly how catastrophic German technological blindness had become at this critical juncture. The month opened with convoy battles that seemed, at least initially, to follow familiar patterns from previous years. On May 4th, Wolfpack Fink successfully located convoy ONS-5 in the North Atlantic, and Admiral Dönitz immediately ordered 30 U-boats to converge for a coordinated mass attack. This concentration of overwhelming submarine force had proven devastatingly effective in previous convoy battles throughout 1942 and early 1943, with submarines overwhelming convoy escorts through sheer numbers, sinking merchant ships much faster than defenders could possibly respond to multiple simultaneous attacks. But convoy ONS-5's escorts had been equipped with improved radar systems, had received better tactical training in anti-submarine warfare, and most importantly possessed reliable air cover from long-range aircraft equipped with ASV Mark III radar that could maintain contact with the convoy far into the Atlantic. The battle raged for 3 desperate days and nights, but instead of the merchant ship slaughter that German tacticians confidently expected based on past experience, U-boats found themselves relentlessly hunted with precision that exceeded anything they had previously encountered. Aircraft appeared over the convoy area whenever submarines attempted surfacing to maneuver for attack positions, forcing them to remain submerged for extended periods that rapidly exhausted battery capacity. Escorts equipped with improved high-frequency direction-finding equipment could pinpoint U-boats from their radio transmissions with great accuracy, immediately vectoring aircraft and surface vessels to exact positions for coordinated attacks. When submarines did manage to surface briefly to recharge batteries or attack, aircraft pounced within minutes, guided by radar that gave absolutely no warning to the German crews until searchlights blazed and depth charges began falling. Of the 30 U-boats concentrated against convoy ONS-5 in this major battle, 6 were sunk outright and several others suffered such severe damage that they had to abort their missions and return to port for extensive repairs. 13 merchant ships were lost from the convoy, certainly a significant toll, but by the standards of previous major convoy battles, this represented a clear German tactical defeat. More importantly for the strategic situation, The battle demonstrated conclusively that massed U-boat tactics employing wolfpack concentrations could no longer overwhelm improved Allied defences that combined better equipment, refined tactics, and effective air power. The true catastrophe unfolded across the rest of May 1943 as U-boats operating throughout the Atlantic found themselves hunted by aircraft that seemed to possess almost omniscient knowledge of submarine positions. Losses mounted with shocking speed that exceeded anything German planners had considered possible. In Berlin, U-boat headquarters staff tracked the mounting casualties with barely concealed horror and growing desperation. The carefully maintained operational plot showing current U-boat positions across the Atlantic gradually began resembling a graveyard map more than a tactical display. Red pins marking lost submarines and crew casualties began outnumbering the blue pins representing operational boats still at sea. Statistical analysts working in the headquarters prepared increasingly grim calculations showing that if current loss rates continued unchanged, the entire operational U-boat force would be completely eliminated within just 4 months, rendering Germany's submarine campaign utterly impossible to sustain. Admiral Dönitz requested an urgent meeting with Adolf Hitler on May 14, 1943, to discuss what he now recognized as an existential crisis for the U-boat campaign. The complete transcript of that meeting, preserved in German naval archives and captured by Allied forces, reveals the Grand Admiral struggling desperately to explain losses he couldn't fully understand to a Führer who habitually interpreted any military setback as evidence of defeatism, incompetence, or outright cowardice, rather than accepting objective military reality. "My Führer, we face a crisis of the very highest magnitude in submarine warfare," Dönitz began carefully, knowing Hitler's volatile temperament. "The enemy has deployed new location technology that makes surface operations at sea almost impossible for our boats. Our losses have become absolutely unbearable and unsustainable. In April, we lost 15 boats. Already in May, we have lost 31 submarines, and more than a week still remains in the month. At this catastrophic rate of attrition, the U-boat force will cease to exist as an effective strategic weapon within a few months at most." Hitler's response mixed outright denial of reality with harsh accusations of leadership failure. "Your commanders lack proper National Socialist fighting spirit," the Führer declared angrily, his voice rising. "They dive at the first sign of enemy aircraft instead of remaining on the surface to fight back aggressively as German warriors should. You personally told me the Metox detection system would protect our submarines from enemy radar. Now you come here saying it does not work and asking to abandon the Atlantic campaign. Perhaps the real problem is leadership failure, not enemy technology, Admiral. Your boats should be attacking more aggressively, not retreating." Dönitz, one of the very few senior military professionals whom Hitler still trusted and respected to any degree, pushed back carefully but firmly with meticulously prepared facts and statistics. "The enemy has developed technological capabilities that we did not anticipate, and our technical intelligence services failed to detect," Dönitz explained, choosing his words with extreme care. "Our technical services and scientific advisors assured us that certain technological developments were physically impossible or lay many years in the future. Those confident assurances have now proven tragically and catastrophically incorrect. We must temporarily withdraw the boats from the Atlantic combat zones until we can develop effective countermeasures to these new enemy capabilities. Otherwise, we will lose the entire submarine force to absolutely no strategic purpose whatsoever, throwing away our most experienced commanders and crews for no gain." Hitler reluctantly agreed to a temporary tactical withdrawal from the North Atlantic, but insisted repeatedly that this was merely a brief operational pause to regroup forces and re-equip boats with improved systems. He specifically authorized immediate development of enhanced anti-aircraft armament for U-boats, believing German commanders' reports that surface combat against attacking aircraft offered a potentially viable alternative to diving when confronted by air attack. This decision would prove just as tragically mistaken as the earlier confident assessments about radar technology limitations, ultimately leading to even more submarine losses when boats attempted fighting aircraft on the surface and quickly discovered that aircraft guns significantly outranged submarine anti-aircraft weapons and aircraft could attack from angles that made return fire nearly impossible. On May 24, 1943, Admiral Dönitz issued the operational order that effectively ended Germany's submarine offensive campaign in the Atlantic Ocean. Most U-boats were immediately recalled to port for refitting with improved equipment. Those boats still at sea on active patrols were directed to avoid combat except in clear self-defense situations, and to proceed with maximum caution to less heavily defended operational areas where Allied aircraft presence was known to be minimal. The decision was carefully presented in official communications as a temporary tactical adjustment to allow technological improvements, but every senior officer who understood the true strategic situation knew this represented fundamental strategic defeat in the Atlantic campaign. Fregattenkapitän Günther Hessler, preparing the official analysis for Naval High Command, wrote a brutally honest confidential assessment that acknowledged reality without yet being able to identify its precise technological cause. "We have lost the Battle of the Atlantic," Hessler concluded in language that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. "The enemy possesses detection capabilities against which we have no effective defense using current equipment and tactics. Until we can successfully identify and develop effective counters to this technology, continued submarine operations cannot succeed at acceptable cost. Current loss rates significantly exceed our production capacity. Continued operations under present conditions will systematically eliminate the entire U-boat force without achieving any meaningful strategic objectives or significantly impacting enemy supply lines." Hessler's grim analysis was circulated among senior naval staff, but immediately classified at the highest secrecy level to prevent its devastating conclusions from reaching Hitler or becoming general knowledge throughout the military that might damage morale. The German Navy had built its entire strategic plan for defeating Britain around submarine warfare and the strangulation of Atlantic supply lines. Acknowledging that U-boats could no longer operate effectively in the Atlantic meant acknowledging that Germany had definitively lost the war at sea, and that eventual defeat was now virtually certain. The British government knew immediately through ultra-intelligence intercepts that something absolutely fundamental had changed in the Atlantic campaign. Decrypted German naval communications revealed Dönitz's withdrawal order and the barely concealed desperation behind the careful official language. RAF Coastal Command leadership recognized that their new radar technology had achieved decisive strategic effects that exceeded even optimistic predictions. Air Marshal John Slessor, who had fought difficult bureaucratic battles to accelerate ASV Mark III deployment against resistance from Bomber Command, allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction while reviewing May's final statistics with his staff. In that single catastrophic month for Germany, Allied aircraft and surface forces, working in close coordination, had sunk 41 U-boats outright and damaged 37 others so severely that they required months of extensive repairs in port. German submarine production facilities were capable of building approximately 20 new boats monthly at maximum sustained output, meaning that losses in May alone exceeded total German construction capacity by more than 2 to 1. At this rate of attrition, simple mathematics showed that the U-boat threat would effectively disappear within months regardless of any tactical or technological improvements Germany might implement. More importantly, for Allied strategic planning, shipping losses from U-boat attacks had plummeted to levels not seen since early in the war. In May 1943, U-boats managed to sink only 58 Allied merchant ships, totaling 299,000 tons, representing the lowest monthly total since 1941, despite Germany having more operational U-boats available than at any previous point in the war. Of those losses, only 34 ships representing 134,000 tons actually sank in the Atlantic Ocean, where U-boats had previously inflicted absolutely catastrophic damage to Allied supply lines. The dramatic turnaround from March 1943, when U-boats had sunk 120 ships totaling 693,000 tons in their last major offensive success, was so sudden and so complete that it took Allied military and political leadership several weeks to fully trust the statistics and accept that the crisis had truly passed. The statistical evidence seemed almost too good to be true. Group Captain Humphrey de Verde Lee, whose searchlight system had proven essential to the new submarine hunting tactics and whose name would forever be associated with nighttime anti-submarine operations, received official recognition and awards for his invaluable contributions to the victory. But Leigh himself, with characteristic modesty and technical accuracy, credited the ASV Mark III radar as the true game-changing technology that had turned the tide. "The Leigh Light makes the final attack possible by illuminating the target," he wrote in a comprehensive after-action technical report, "but the radar makes locating the submarine inevitable in the first place. Without Mark III radar capabilities, we would still be stumbling around blindly in darkness, hoping to accidentally find submarines through luck. With this radar technology, we can locate virtually every submarine that surfaces anywhere within our patrol areas and prosecute attacks before German crews even know we have detected them. The technology has created hunting conditions that give submarines essentially no realistic chance of survival. The American naval forces operating in the Atlantic contributed their own significant successes to the Allied victory using American-developed microwave radar systems. Very long-range B-24 Liberator bombers equipped with American SCR-517 and ASG radar systems, operating from newly established bases in Iceland, Newfoundland, and the Azores, finally closed the notorious mid-Atlantic gap, where U-boats had previously operated beyond the range of land-based aircraft. German submarines discovered to their horror that they were now being hunted everywhere across the entire Atlantic. There were no remaining safe zones, no areas where darkness or sheer distance provided any protection whatsoever from air attack. Allied maritime patrol aircraft equipped with the new generation of radar technology could detect, track and attack submarines anywhere they surfaced, in any weather conditions, at any time of day or night, giving U-boat commanders no respite and no sanctuary. Kapitän Eberhard Gott, serving as chief of U-boat operations under Dönitz, prepared a classified strategic assessment dated May 28, 1943, that captured the hopeless tactical situation with brutal honesty. The submarine has effectively lost its most essential operational characteristic, which is invisibility when operating on the surface, Gott wrote in his report to Naval High Command. The enemy can now locate our boats on the surface through technical means that we cannot effectively counter with any available equipment or tactics. Remaining submerged eliminates this vulnerability to air attack, but makes sustained combat operations functionally impossible due to severe battery capacity limitations that require frequent surfacing. We face an apparently unsolvable tactical dilemma with no clear solution. Until we can somehow restore our boat's ability to operate on the surface without immediate detection by enemy aircraft, effective submarine warfare simply cannot be conducted at operationally acceptable loss rates. Gott's analysis identified the fundamental strategic problem with perfect precision. U-boats absolutely required surfacing regularly to recharge batteries, ventilate the boat's atmosphere, and travel at speeds adequate for intercepting and pursuing convoys. If surfacing immediately made them vulnerable to rapid air attack from aircraft they couldn't detect, submarines simply couldn't perform their primary mission. The only possible solutions were developing technology that would either detect Allied aircraft before they came within attack range or eliminate the operational need for frequent surfacing through revolutionary new submarine designs. German engineers began working desperately on both problems simultaneously, but practical solutions would arrive far too late to meaningfully change the war's outcome or restore U-boat effectiveness. The gradual recognition that Allied radar technology had fundamentally surpassed German capabilities came slowly and incompletely even after May 1943's disaster. Many German naval officers and technical staff continued clinging to the false belief that Metox detector emissions were somehow being tracked by British aircraft, rather than accepting the psychologically difficult truth that British scientists had developed genuinely superior radar, operating on wavelengths German equipment couldn't detect. The comforting false theory persisted because acknowledging the actual truth meant admitting that German technical intelligence had failed catastrophically at the most critical moment and that enemy scientists had successfully solved complex problems that Germany's finest experts had confidently declared impossible. The first solid physical evidence confirming the existence of British centimetric radar came from interrogation of captured British aircrew. In June 1943, Luftwaffe intelligence officers conducted detailed questioning of a Wellington pilot whose aircraft had been shot down during a Bay of Biscay anti-submarine patrol. Under persistent interrogation, the pilot mentioned that his aircraft's radar system could reliably detect U-boats at ranges consistently exceeding 10 miles and operated on centimetric wavelengths far shorter than the meter wavelength systems Germans knew about. German interrogators initially dismissed these claims as obvious disinformation intended to mislead intelligence analysis, but the pilot's highly detailed technical descriptions were far too consistent and specific to be simple fabrication or memorized cover story. The major breakthrough in German understanding came in July 1943, when a Wellington bomber equipped with complete ASV Mark III radar was shot down by German fighters near Brest and recovered largely intact from shallow water. German technicians carefully examining the wreckage discovered the cavity magnetron and immediately recognized its enormous significance for radar technology. The compact device was so far beyond anything in current German radar development that engineers initially refused to believe it represented operational equipment, insisting it must be an experimental prototype being tested rather than standard production equipment installed in operational aircraft. Only when additional intelligence from multiple sources confirmed that hundreds of Allied aircraft carried functionally identical systems did German military leadership finally accept the devastating truth that had been staring them in the face for months. The enemy has achieved clear and significant technological superiority in the absolutely critical area of centimetric radar development, acknowledged a comprehensive Luftwaffe technical assessment dated August 3, 1943. Their cavity magnetron generates microwave power at levels we cannot currently duplicate with any available German technology. This revolutionary device enables highly effective radar systems operating at 10 centimeter wavelength with sufficient power output and target resolution for precise submarine detection at operationally significant ranges. Our Metox detection equipment cannot detect transmissions at these extremely short wavelengths. We face a serious technological gap that will require many months, possibly years, to close through intensive research and development efforts. The frank admission sent shockwaves through German military and scientific bureaucracy at the highest levels. How had this technological surprise happened so completely? How had enemy scientists achieved such fundamental breakthroughs that German physicists had confidently claimed were physically impossible or lay decades in the future? The painful answer gradually emerging was that British and American industrial capacity, combined with scientific communities that actively fostered innovation rather than crushing it under rigid military hierarchy and ideological constraints, had simply out-innovated their German counterparts across multiple critical technology domains. The democratic allies that German propaganda had relentlessly portrayed as weak, decadent, and scientifically inferior had developed genuinely war-winning technology, while German researchers remained trapped in increasingly dated paradigms and unable to challenge official assessments. German scientists immediately began desperate attempts to replicate British cavity magnetron technology, but the difficult work proceeded slowly and achieved only limited success. Manufacturing the precisely machined cavity magnetrons required specialized machine tools and sophisticated production techniques that German industry struggled to implement, while simultaneously under devastating and increasingly accurate Allied strategic bombing that disrupted production and destroyed facilities. More fundamentally and problematically, the Germans were now playing technological catch-up in a race where Allied scientists continued advancing rapidly. By the time Germany finally developed marginally functional magnetrons in late 1943, Allied forces had already begun deploying significantly improved versions operating at even shorter wavelengths with better performance. The Germans also worked intensively on developing effective countermeasures to the new radar threat. The Naxos radar detector, specifically designed to detect centimetric radar emissions, finally reached operational U-boats in October 1943, after months of rushed development and testing. Unlike the highly effective Metox system, which could detect meter wavelength transmissions at ranges up to 6 miles, providing adequate warning time, the new Naxos detector had extremely limited effective range of only 2 to 3 miles at best. This gave U-boat commanders mere minutes to initiate emergency crash dives, frequently insufficient time to reach safe depths below the surface before depth charges arrived and detonated. The Naxos detector also proved mechanically unreliable and temperamental in harsh maritime environment, frequently giving false alarm readings from non-existent threats and occasionally failing to detect actual radar transmissions from certain approach angles. Even worse for German hopes, by the time Naxos equipment finally became available for installation, Allied aircraft had already begun deploying next-generation radar systems operating at 3 centimeter wavelength that the Naxos detector was completely incapable of detecting, rendering the equipment obsolete before it achieved widespread deployment. U-boat commanders who somehow survived May 1943's slaughter and eventually returned to sea in autumn 1943 found themselves facing hunting systems that were even more capable and lethal than what had decimated the fleet earlier. Kapitänleutnant Wolfgang Lüth, one of Germany's most highly decorated and experienced submarine commanders, filed a brutally honest tactical assessment after completing his final combat patrol in October 1943. "The sea now belongs entirely to the enemy and his aircraft," Lüth wrote with resignation that would have been unthinkable in earlier war years. "His aircraft effectively control every square mile of ocean surface. They can see our submarines when we cannot possibly see them or detect their presence. They attack with precision we cannot hope to match using our current equipment and tactics. Our boats have become functionally obsolete in this new technological environment. Unless some revolutionary technology can somehow restore our fundamental ability to operate unseen on the surface, submarine warfare as we have practiced it throughout this war simply cannot continue at acceptable cost. We are sending experienced men to die for absolutely no strategic purpose or tactical gain." Lüth's grim assessment proved tragically prophetic. German submarines continued operating throughout 1944 and into 1945, but never again posed the existential threat to Allied supply lines they had represented before May 1943's technological revolution. New U-boat designs incorporating snorkel systems that theoretically allowed underwater diesel operation showed some promise in testing, but arrived far too late and in far too few numbers to meaningfully affect the war's outcome. The revolutionary Type 21 electric submarines, capable of sustained high-speed underwater travel that might have changed submarine warfare fundamentally, began production in 1944, but arrived so late that virtually none entered actual combat before Germany's final surrender. These belated technological responses attempted to address the radar detection problem, but by the time they reached any kind of operational service, the Battle of the Atlantic had been decisively lost for over a year. The cold statistics of submarine warfare tell the story of Germany's defeat with brutal mathematical clarity. In 1942, before ASV Mark III radar deployment began, German U-boats sank 1,160 Allied merchant ships, inflicting severe damage on Allied supply capabilities. In 1943, as the revolutionary new radar reached operational squadrons and rapidly expanded deployment, sinkings dropped catastrophically to only 463 ships, despite Germany having more operational U-boats available than ever before in the war. In 1944, with Allied aircraft equipped with advanced radar completely dominating all sea lanes, only 132 merchant ships fell victim to submarine attacks. The U-boat force that had very nearly strangled Britain into surrender and starvation now represented barely more than a minor nuisance requiring modest defensive precautions. Meanwhile, U-boat losses climbed remorselessly upward throughout this same period. Germany lost 87 submarines in 1941, 86 in 1942, then a staggering 244 boats in 1943 as Allied anti-submarine technology and tactics reached full effectiveness. In 1944, another 249 U-boats were destroyed, and in the war's final chaotic months, 153 additional boats were lost. By war's end, Germany had constructed 1,181 U-boats, representing an enormous industrial investment of millions of man-hours and vast quantities of increasingly scarce strategic materials, of which 785 were lost in combat operations, 221 were deliberately scuttled by their own crews to prevent capture, and only 156 survived until final surrender. Of approximately 40,000 men who served in the U-boat force during the war, Roughly 28,000 died in action, and 5,000 were captured, representing casualty rates exceeding 70%. These were the highest casualty rates suffered by any military service in any nation during the entire Second World War, grim testament to the absolutely deadly effectiveness of Allied anti-submarine warfare technology. Karl Dönitz, promoted to command the entire German Navy in early 1943 and briefly serving as Germany's head of state after Hitler's suicide in the final days, never publicly acknowledged that superior Allied technology had fundamentally defeated his cherished submarine force. In numerous meetings with Hitler throughout 1943 and 1944, he consistently blamed inadequate crew training, insufficient anti-aircraft armament, and failure to develop advanced submarine designs quickly enough through industrial production. In his extensive private writings and later post-war memoirs, Dönitz persistently maintained that U-boats had ultimately been defeated by simply overwhelming Allied numerical superiority in ships and aircraft rather than by genuinely superior enemy technology. This stubborn self-deception conveniently allowed him to avoid directly confronting his own significant role in systematically dismissing credible intelligence reports about Allied radar development as impossible fantasy. The Grand Admiral, who had literally laughed at early intelligence reports suggesting British airborne microwave radar, continued insisting until his death in 1980 that German submarines had lost the Atlantic battle due to quantitative rather than qualitative disadvantages. But German submariners who actually survived the war and endured years in prisoner-of-war camps knew the complete truth. In British and American POW facilities, captured U-boat officers discussed extensively among themselves how thoroughly and completely Allied technology had outclassed German capabilities across multiple domains. Korvettenkapitän Wolfgang Lüth, imprisoned in Britain after his capture in early 1944, participated in numerous frank conversations that British intelligence officers secretly recorded for intelligence analysis. The declassified tapes, finally released decades after the war ended, revealed the profound psychological impact of technological defeat on men who had believed completely in German superiority. We genuinely believed that German science and engineering were inherently superior to anything our enemies could produce, Lüth admitted candidly to fellow prisoners in a recorded conversation from January 1945. We had been repeatedly told through propaganda that our enemies were racially and culturally inferior, fundamentally incapable of matching Aryan intellectual achievement in any field. Then, they systematically developed radar technology we couldn't see, couldn't effectively counter, couldn't even properly understand until they literally showed us captured equipment and explained how it worked. They defeated us decisively through superior science and vastly greater industrial capacity. Everything we had been taught to believe about inherent German superiority was nothing more than propaganda and dangerous lies that cost hundreds of thousands of lives. The painful revelation that Allied scientists, including numerous Jewish refugees who had fled Germany to escape Nazi persecution, had created much of the technology that ultimately defeated U-boats, struck particularly hard at core Nazi racial ideology. Many of the brilliant physicists and engineers who developed the cavity magnetron, ASV Mark III radar, and related technologies were precisely the people that Nazi racial doctrine had classified as racially and intellectually inferior. German anti-Semitic policies had systematically driven many of their most talented scientists to Britain and America, where these refugees contributed invaluably to developing weapons systems that helped crush Germany's military forces. The bitter irony was absolutely devastating to submariners who had thoroughly internalized Nazi racial theories about Jewish inferiority. The comprehensive post-war analysis conducted by Allied intelligence services, examining German technical intelligence failures, revealed just how completely and systematically German assessment capabilities had failed at the most critical juncture. British scientists had successfully test-flown the first operational magnetron-equipped radar system in early 1940, fully 3 years before the technology reached widespread deployment in frontline aircraft. German intelligence organizations had numerous significant opportunities to identify and properly assess this revolutionary development through multiple channels including captured equipment, systematic interrogation of prisoners, and technical espionage operations. Yet German technical experts working for military intelligence consistently and repeatedly dismissed all evidence of Allied radar advances as either impossible propaganda designed to mislead or wildly exaggerated claims about experimental systems that could never achieve operational deployment. This catastrophic failure stemmed partly from deep overconfidence in German scientific capabilities and the assumption that German physics was inherently superior, but equally importantly from rigid military bureaucracy that systematically punished officers who delivered unwelcome news to senior leadership. Admiral Dönitz had genuinely wanted to believe his U-boats remained invulnerable to effective air detection beyond visual range. Technical advisors who suggested otherwise or who questioned official assessments of Allied capabilities risked damaging their careers severely. Kapitän Wolfgang Martini, whose repeated confident assurances about Allied radar limitations proved so catastrophically and tragically wrong, faced absolutely no consequences for his failures that cost thousands of lives. Instead, he received promotion and continued advising German forces on electronic warfare throughout the entire war, his fundamental misjudgments forgotten or forgiven. The institutional culture that consistently rewarded confident assertions of German superiority while systematically punishing accurate but pessimistic analysis of enemy capabilities virtually guaranteed that strategic technological surprises would continue. By the time German leadership finally accepted that Allied radar technology had definitively surpassed their own capabilities, the Battle of the Atlantic had been irretrievably lost for months. American shipyards were launching new merchant vessels faster than U-boats could possibly sink them even in the most optimistic scenarios. Allied anti-submarine forces had achieved total dominance of all sea lanes. The invasion of Europe, which German strategists had desperately hoped to prevent by strangling Britain's Atlantic supply lines, proceeded exactly on schedule because submarines no longer meaningfully threatened convoy routes. The ASV Mark III radar and the cavity magnetron that powered it represented one of the war's true strategic weapons, technology that directly and fundamentally altered the conflict's outcome in decisive ways. Unlike atomic bombs, which ended a war already militarily decided through conventional means, or jet aircraft, which arrived far too late to affect results meaningfully, airborne microwave radar changed the Battle of the Atlantic's outcome at its absolutely most critical moment. Without this revolutionary technology deployed when it was, U-boats might well have made Operation Overlord impossible or forced significant delays, potentially allowing a negotiated peace that left Nazi Germany in control of continental Europe. Instead, the radar's deployment in spring 1943 broke the submarine threat permanently and irreversibly, ensuring Allied victory in the Atlantic and making the liberation of Europe militarily feasible. The scientists and engineers who developed this war-winning technology received some official recognition and awards, but never achieved the widespread public fame accorded to atomic scientists or aircraft designers. Robert Hanbury Brown, who made the crucial suggestion about adapting H-2S radar for anti-submarine warfare, continued his distinguished physics career after the war, eventually becoming an internationally renowned radio astronomer. His vital wartime contribution to defeating U-boats remained classified for many years, preventing proper public acknowledgement of his role in one of the war's decisive turning points. John Randall and Harry Boot, the brilliant inventors of the cavity magnetron that made everything possible, similarly faded into relative obscurity despite creating a device that won the Battle of the Atlantic and revolutionized radar technology permanently. Their invention became the foundation for modern microwave communications, weather radar, air traffic control systems, and even microwave ovens, yet their names remain largely unknown outside specialist scientific circles. The German submariners who directly experienced attacks enabled by this technology never forgot the psychological trauma of being hunted by seemingly invisible predators. In reunion meetings held decades after the war ended, survivors spoke with residual fear about the Leigh Light attacks that had seemed to materialize from nowhere in the darkness. Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Schröteler, who survived an astonishing 5 separate air attacks while commanding U-667, described recurring nightmares about searchlights blazing from empty darkness even 40 years after the war ended. You never quite escape that terrible moment when night suddenly turns to noon and you realize you're about to die. Schroeter said in a candid 1983 interview. For the rest of your life, you remain psychologically vulnerable to that traumatic memory. I still sometimes wake in darkness seeing that blinding light and hearing the depth charges exploding. The German Navy never recovered strategically from May 1943's catastrophic losses. While U-boats continued operations through the war's end, they never again seriously threatened Allied commerce or meaningfully influenced naval strategy. The submarines that had very nearly defeated Britain became hunted prey, spending far more effort on mere survival than on effective attacks against enemy shipping. German shipyards continued building submarines faster than ever in 1944, but the boats were being sunk faster than replacement crews could be adequately trained to operate them. By war's end, some submarines sailed with crews who had received only a few weeks of hasty training, essentially a death sentence given Allied anti-submarine capabilities. The final historical accounting revealed the Battle of the Atlantic's true nature as fundamentally a technological race comprehensively won by superior Allied science and industry. Germany constructed 1,181 U-boats during the war, representing an absolutely enormous industrial investment of millions of man-hours and vast quantities of increasingly scarce strategic materials. Yet this entire massive force, once deployed against Allied convoys, ultimately proved completely unable to prevent the invasion of Europe or meaningfully interdict the supply lines that sustained Britain through 6 years of total war. The investment comprehensively failed because German technology, tactics and training were systematically overcome by Allied innovations in radar, sonar, code-breaking, tactical doctrine, and above all industrial production capacity that Germany could never hope to match. The cavity magnetron, a compact device weighing less than 5 kilograms, effectively defeated hundreds of submarines, displacing hundreds of tons each and costing millions of Reichsmarks to construct. This represented the ultimate triumph of scientific innovation over brute force industrial production. The lesson of radar's decisive role in the Battle of the Atlantic echoed through military planning and strategic thinking for generations afterward. Technological superiority cannot be assumed or guaranteed by past achievements or confident expert assertions alone. The nation that innovates faster, implements improvements more quickly and effectively, and maintains flexible adaptive thinking will dominate regardless of initial starting advantages or historical precedents. Germany began the war with genuinely superior radar technology and more advanced naval systems, but comprehensively lost the crucial radar development race because Allied scientists asked fundamentally better questions, received stronger institutional support for pursuing revolutionary answers, and worked within systems. That rewarded innovation rather than crushing it under bureaucratic rigidity. The cavity magnetron represented exactly the kind of revolutionary breakthrough that German technical experts had confidently declared impossible based on their understanding of existing theory and available technology. British and American physicists achieved what Germans considered impossible because they fundamentally refused to accept theoretical limitations as absolute final answers that precluded further investigation. This essential willingness to systematically challenge established assumptions, combined with massive industrial capacity to rapidly mass-produce breakthrough technologies once developed, gave the Allies decisive advantages across multiple technological domains that proved war-winning. The radar revolution that began with defeating U-boats certainly did not end with World War II's conclusion. Post-war technological developments built directly and extensively on cavity magnetron technology, ultimately creating the sophisticated radar systems that enable modern aviation safety, accurate weather forecasting, space exploration, satellite communications, and literally countless civilian applications that define modern technological society. The device, originally developed desperately and under severe time pressure to hunt submarines, became absolute foundation technology for the modern world, touching virtually every aspect of contemporary life in ways its inventors could never have imagined. Every commercial aircraft that lands safely in fog, every accurate weather forecast based on radar imaging, every application of microwave communication technology, every GPS satellite, traces direct technological lineage back to Randall and Booth's Birmingham laboratory and the desperate wartime necessity of defeating U-boats before they strangled Britain into surrender or starvation. The Germans, who initially laughed dismissively at intelligence reports describing American flying radar and British airborne detection capabilities, stopped laughing abruptly in May 1943, when their submarine fleet systematically dissolved under relentless attacks that materialized from seemingly empty darkness. The technological arrogance that had assured them of inherent German superiority was shattered by the reality of Allied innovation that had quietly surpassed German capabilities by an entire generation, while German experts confidently dismissed the possibility as scientific fantasy. Those who survived to become prisoners of war spent years contemplating how thoroughly their fundamental assumptions about German technological superiority had been exposed as dangerous delusions. The story of airborne radar's development and decisive deployment represents one of World War II's most crucial yet underappreciated turning points. While dramatic battles and famous generals captured public imagination and historical attention, the real war was often decided in laboratories and factories where scientists and engineers raced to develop technologies that would render existing weapons obsolete and existing tactics suicidal. The Battle of the Atlantic was ultimately won not by the bravery of convoy escorts or the determination of merchant seamen, though both were absolutely essential, but by physicists and engineers who solved problems their enemies insisted were impossible to solve. The cavity magnetron was more than merely a military device or technological curiosity. It symbolized and embodied the fundamental triumph of open democratic societies over rigid totalitarian systems, of free scientific inquiry over ideologically constrained research, of industrial democracy over militarized autocracy, of innovation over tradition, and of adaptation over rigid doctrine. The Allies won the technological race because their systems fostered creativity, rewarded innovation, encouraged challenging established assumptions, and rapidly implemented improvements, while German systems increasingly crushed initiative under bureaucratic rigidity, punished bearers of unwelcome truths, and clung desperately to outdated paradigms long after evidence demanded new thinking. This lesson remained vitally relevant long after 1945, shaping Cold War technological competition and continuing to influence how nations approach scientific research and military innovation into the present day. The radar that hunted U-boats in darkness transcended its immediate military application to teach a profound and enduring truth. Sustained technological superiority requires not just talented scientists and engineers, but institutional systems that empower them to challenge conventional wisdom, pursue revolutionary ideas, and rapidly translate laboratory breakthroughs into operational capabilities that can be deployed at scale. Germany lost the Battle of the Atlantic, not because it lacked brilliant scientists or capable engineers, but because its political and military systems increasingly suppressed the critical thinking and institutional flexibility required for sustained innovation in the face of determined competition. The radar revolution of 1943 demonstrated that wars are ultimately won not by the nation with the largest armies or most territory, but by the nation that innovates most effectively and implements improvements most rapidly. That lesson, written in the depths of the Atlantic Ocean where thousands of submariners died, remains as relevant and vital today as it was 80 years ago, when Allied radar finally broke the U-boat threat and ensured victory in history's longest and most complex naval campaign.